Hey guys, how's everyone doing? Welcome back to Harry's Highlights. On this video, we're going to be talking about the book Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. Now this is all about understanding how to positively change your subconscious. Now there's some really interesting philosophies in this. It's really about understanding some of the deeper levels of psychology and yourself really and personal development. See, one of the philosophies that I really want to cover there, I want to share with you guys and talk about is understanding how everyone really has, to some degree, two identities. And this is understanding that there's the identity that you yourself see. Then there's the identity that others see. And what this is talking about is that a lot of us have this internal description of ourselves. And sometimes it's positive, but more often than not, it's a little bit more negative than what it should be. And then there's the other side that other people see, which is normally quite positive. But that internal dialogue that we have shapes so much of the way that we see ourselves. For example, how often is it that you might be describing yourself and your internal dialogue, and it might be describing yourself as I'm not really good enough for this. I'm unworthy. It might be undeserving of this one or unentitled. But other people see you and go you are just so worthy of all this. You're just so deserving of everything you're getting. When it's understanding that that conflicting viewpoints on both sides of you creates two identities, because you understand this person cares about you and they're only saying things that are truthful and what they see, so you believe it. But then there's also the internal dialogue which you see, which is different, and unfortunately it causes these two identities to form, and it's a reason why so many people seem to have so much. They achieve all this success, all this fame, fortune, but then still feel so unfulfilled and depressed and sad. And the reason is because what the rest of the world is seeing and the people that they love and care about are seeing is different to what they themselves see. And what happens is that your subconscious can't tell the difference between what you say and what other people's and what you see on the outside. So what this book was talking about was about intentionally affecting our destiny. So if you see it as a case of that, no matter what happens, we have a huge amount of potential. So we have this ability to achieve great things. In essence, a destiny that all of us can achieve in some way, somehow. This book is teaching us how to basically positively affect our destiny with intentionality. Understanding that you can allow your environment to affect it, or you can positively affect it yourself, or negatively affect it by using negative self-talk. So, to quote Henry Ford, he talks about understanding whether you think you can or you think you can't, you are right. This is talking about understanding that whatever you believe or you decide to believe is what your reality will become. So the author uses things like quantum physics to explain this. So without getting too technical, it talks about basically explaining that once you change your focus on what has potential, that potential and that focused thing will grow. A great way to explain this is that if tomorrow I decide I'm going to be the world's greatest skateboarder, all of a sudden all of my energy and focus is going into that thing that I want to focus on, but the potential for it is now increasing. See, there was always a potential there for me to do it, but until I started to observe it, until I began to focus on it, there was no potential growing on it. It's like that I was saying that whatever you focus on grows. So at the same time, if tomorrow I decided I want to be a world-class writer, that potential for that is now growing because all my energy and focus is channeling into that. And it's sort of understanding how basically our thoughts can become our experience. So anything that we decide that we're going to think about or put focus on will become what we experience. Two people walking down the street, one person, it starts raining, one person sees it as this is a great time because I'm going to cool down. The other person sees the exact same situation as a terrible time because now they're all wet. What you think about is what you experience. That person thought about positivity, so their experience was positive. That other person thought about negativity, so their experience was negative. So when you understand that how both people had the chance or potential for it to be positive or negative, it's just what they chose to focus on. Now, understanding that your subconscious doesn't know the difference between your internal world and your external world. So the negative thoughts that you say to yourself will manifest in the external world outside of you. The positive thoughts you say to yourself will also manifest in the world around you. So when you understand just how much control you have over situations, and when you understand that your subconscious is basically the driving force behind your reality, that you decide, just as those two people walking down the street, seeing the exact same situation, and based on their subconscious and what they told themselves and what they wanted to focus on, had completely different experiences. That gives you so much more power and control in your hands. See, the great saying, the explanation of philosophy is that we only act because of our thoughts. So every action started out as a thought. The words I'm saying began as thoughts. My hand movements began as thoughts. The reason somebody becomes something is because they thought about it and then they acted upon those thoughts. So if you have thoughts that are positive, you'll act positive. If you have thoughts that are negative, you'll act negative. So understanding that in that same concept, in order to become wealthy or in order to become successful, you have to think like a wealthy person or a successful person. And the same would go that if you didn't want to become something like that, you wouldn't think about it. So to understand this in a different way is about explaining, especially in the book, explains that everyone has 3 brains. And now that's not 3 individual brains, but I guess a more accurate way of explaining it is layers. Everybody has 3 layers to their brains, which are, without getting too technical, you have the neocortex, you have the limbic brain, and you have the cerebellum. Now, a simpler form of putting these on is that the neocortex, or the thinking part, the doing part, or the limbic brain, and the becoming part, or being part, of the cerebellum. So, in the neocortex, where thoughts are formed, this is where logic and reason all begins. Then there's the doing part, or your limbic brain, where emotion is formed. Then there's the cerebellum, where habits, attitudes, and behaviors are all solidified and become. So when you break those 3 down into, you can understand how, like, when you're thinking, using your neocortex and thoughts and rationale and logic is all formed. Then the limbic brain, where you're acting, basically where all the emotions that fuel your decisions. And the cerebellum, where you become. So when those 2 first parts of your brain form a decision, this is where your habits and attitudes and behaviors are solidified. It's the becoming or being. So with understanding those 3 parts of your brain, you can understand that when you have negative self-talk, and you might base it on logic and reason, you might go, I'm undeserving because in comparison to that person who's worked far harder than I have, or who's been doing far more than I have in some way or somehow. That's the logic and reasoning. That's in that neocortex, the thinking part of the brain. You then add emotion to it. And then you start to think of it like, and how you start to feel about that. And then because of those 2 combined, your cerebellum then starts to form the habit or the attitude or the behavior, and it's what you become. But it doesn't happen straight away. It's over multiple times of it happening and experiencing it. See, for example, if I wanted to become that skateboarder, I decided I wanted to become that skateboarder, but for me to become good at it, it took multiple deliberate hours of practice. And so it eventually became a habit, it became, my attitude towards it, it became the behavior I projected. And understanding those 2 parts of the brain is the same thing with when you have those 2 identities. The identity that you see yourself personally or internally happened because, it might have started like, depending on what part of your brain you started with, you might have felt like, I feel like I'm just undeserving of this one. And then that's part of that limbic brain, the emotion, the doing part. The thinking part of your brain adds that rationale and logic to it and reasoning and going, yeah, because in comparison to that person, I'm doing far less, so I'm undeserving of this one. You continually think those thoughts, and eventually your cerebellum forms it into an attitude or a behavior, and that's what you become. Now, in that same token, when somebody else says something to you and says, you are so deserving of all this because of all these reasons, they're speaking to your emotion, your limbic brain, and your neocortex, the logic and thinking. And you put them together and you go, oh yeah, like they're saying all those things, they wouldn't lie to me, and they are true what they're saying. And then that becomes part of your behavior, and that's who you become. The problem is you now have 2 separate identities about the exact same issue or the exact same topic. So what this book is talking about is about how to become congruent with those 2 thoughts. About understanding that you need to start speaking to your subconscious and looking at that deeper level of what you truly are. So a lot of the time, we're not self-compassionate enough. The things that we say about ourselves, the way we talk about ourselves, is not with enough understanding. It can be very harsh and unfair. With the way that a lot of other people see us, they're seeing us far more objectively than we realise. Sometimes we're looking at ourselves with more emotion than we are logic, because we're looking at it based on, we don't feel worthy because of this comparison, and then we add logic to it. Where somebody else might be looking at it with logic and then adding the emotion to it. Well, Harry, you have worked hard, and I like you. See, they've said the logic first and then added the emotion, and that's why they formed that opinion. We might start, with the middle of the limbic brain, and then adding the neocortex and the logic behind it, and then it becomes part of cerebellum and our behavior. So what this is talking about is understanding how to speak to the subconscious to break that habit of being yourself. So to quickly summarize, it's about positively changing your subconscious, intentionally affecting our destiny. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you are right. So taking that on board about understanding that, like, what I think is what I'll become. You change your focus onto what, and whatever you change your focus onto will then have potential. Your thoughts will become your experience. So you need to be so aware of what you're thinking, because that is what will become. Your subconscious doesn't know the difference between your internal world and your external world. We only act because of our thoughts. So make sure your thoughts and your subconscious are all saying positive things, so you can then become more of a positive person. So taking that on board, you have to become wealthy or successful, you have to think like a wealthy or successful person. Understanding the three brains, the neocortex, the limbic, and the cerebellum, and how they all come together, the thinking, the doing, and the becoming. Once you can internalize all of this and take all of this on board and understand how to positively change your subconscious, you can then find a way to be able to break the habit of being yourself. Now, we make a lot more of these videos for this training series to help you with your personal development goals. That's all for now. So until next time, leave a comment below on what you like the most, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the next episode of Harry's Highlights.